Hey everyone, it's week 8, early in week 8, and so this video is going to touch on week seven's video assignment about Jonathan Haidt and his ideas about tribalization. He talked a little bit about the international stage. Then in week 8, we are going to talk about the international stage, about international politics, and how nation states negotiate with one another. In the previous week, week 7, we also talked about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights from the UN and Thomas Frank's perspective on human rights. So I kind of want to give you a little bit of a nexus point to think about and understand this stuff without too much soapboxing. So Jonathan Haidt says that we have this tribal nature within all of us humans, and that is absolutely true. And just because it's natural or innate doesn't mean it's something that we ought to necessarily embrace. Right? Because it's like, well, if somebody's different than me, or if I perceive them being as part of an outgroup, that's natural, and so then I should just keep them in that outgroup. It's like, well, no, not necessarily. They may differ from you in minimal and unimportant ways, which we'll come back to. So Jonathan Haidt says, well, so we're tribalized, and things have gotten worse because of, well, there's ideas in society that promoted our division and our separation, social media, but also 24-hour news may have preyed upon our fears and our prejudices for ratings, because we are all very easily manipulated by things that scare and frighten us. In fact, most of you who are on social media, you should recognize that those algorithms play to your dislikes more than to your likes. It says maybe you'll like this. What it should say is maybe this will bother or frighten you, and that increases engagement on social media. But he gives us an example, I think, Haidt does, about Northern Europe and how traditionally homogenous those societies have been. And they've been able to achieve really, really amazing social programs, amazing amounts of sharing, lots of taxation, but really effective market economies that could support these huge redistributive programs. The problem is, they said, well, because we have such abundance and wealth in our society, and because they were so open and liberal, they thought they should share it. And what a nice sentiment. And so they invite all of these different people in. Sometimes, well, the biggest challenges have been certainly people from across the Middle East, North Africa, tend to be very conservative, socially speaking, and oftentimes religious, whereas people in Northern Europe tend to be much more secular. There was massive conflict just on a value and a behavior level, right? These cultures didn't really fit well together, and no one thought about that. But they also had this sort of relativistic perspective, say Norway or take your pick. So they didn't want to tell anyone what to do, right? But if you invite new people into your culture to live, you need to give them a roadmap for how things work so that they can integrate and function in your society and not be these permanent outsiders. So I think that's a really fascinating concept, which can tie us back, I think, a little bit to the challenges that Putnam mentioned in week 1. Right, Putnam gave us a lot of information. He said we needed to participate and we needed to build social capital, and the breakdown of social capital led to a level of distrust that caused us to pull away from everyone else, to pull into our shells, and to stop participating in politics. But something that was interesting, that's odd to me, that wasn't more expanded upon, was increasingly diverse societies have increasingly closed off rates of participation or decrease in participation. And that seems really obvious, and it might be because of his political bias. He didn't want to engage in it or think about it. And I'm certainly not encouraging anyone to say, well, if diversity causes us to pull back in, then we need to not have diverse societies so we can engage. No, that's not the point at all. We have to acknowledge the challenges so that we can get around them or solve them, right? In America, we are one of the most diverse places in the world, partly just by the design of our political and economic system. Not to mention, we have more opportunity here in this country than most places. And so lots and lots of people want to come here and will continue to want to come here. And economically and culturally speaking, we benefit from that. But there are some drawbacks. And we need to account for that. We need to consider that and say, well, what can we do? One of the things that hopefully some of you have hit on in this week's assignments is we have to find ways to bridge the gap between groups that appear different. And one that Dr. Galusha had talked about in years past was the similarity between Republicans or conservative Americans and Hispanics, for example, Mexicans particularly. Both are family focused, tend to be religious, have conservative social values, and so the veneer, you might say, is different. Soccer ball versus football, tamales and pozole versus turkey and dressing and cranberry sauce. But the values of the two groups are so shockingly similar that it kind of boggles the mind that recent immigrants vote Democrat at all. Of course, we know because of discussion about immigration and how Republicans and Democrats, signal that differently. We understand why. So, what's the point? The point is, in a diverse society like we have here in the U.S., we need to find other things that can bind us together outside of traditional concepts of language, religion, skin color, blah, 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 blah. All stuff that Etzioni talked about back in week 2, right? We need to find stuff to bind us together, and that's going to be values and ideas and beliefs, whether it's about the governing system, organizational principles, economic principles, the rules of the game, meritocracy, whatever it is. Because the more we focus on how little individual things separate us, well, we see where that's gotten us thus far. So I'll stop here, and hopefully you'll see how these things kind of combine together to create a larger story.